My guest today is Mary Engel, and she is known as the management coach. She's a recognized speaker, coach, consultant, and business executive who helps leaders and managers increase their incomes, raise their performance ratings, and achieve the leadership positions that they aspire to. She also helps organizations improve their profitability, cash flow, and employee productivity through a proven facilitation process that she has honed over 10 years as a management consultant. She's worked closely with managers and leaders across all industries and has extensive experience working with global brands, public and private companies, startups, and family owned businesses across North America. She is the managing director of the Global Women's Leadership Summit, the world's largest online professional development event for women. And I'm honored that I have been able to speak at this event several times and will be doing that again this year. She is a co founder and head coach for Redden Global and has co created the world's first mobile management toolkit to help leaders be more effective in work and life, called the Emerson Suite. Well, it's a real honor and privilege to have you with us today, Mary. How are you?
Thank you, Gail. It's an honor to be here. I'm doing great.
Well, it's very interesting because you're working with management and in management all the time. And, they get a lot of flack. As a matter of fact, they're getting more flack now, I think, than ever. And there seems to be a stigma associated with being a manager. And a manager is expected to kind of rise up the ranks to leaders, but they're not all candidates for leadership. So, what is the flack and the stigma about being a manager all about?
Yeah, it's a good question, Gail. I think that the stigma that comes along with management is sort of perpetuated by the industry, sometimes even the coaching industry, who are here to primarily serve these managers who are getting this flack. So, for example, if you read the state of the state of the nation from Gallup around employee productivity and employee engagement, you'll often read that particular publication describing managers as bad managers, and so they basically describe the state of the employee engagement in workforce as being a product of bad managers. And I just think this is a false stigma that we're associating with managers. My personal belief is that managers are basically running the world right now. I mean, they are the largest population of employees other than employees themselves. And to be a manager is to take on a boatload of responsibility, of emotion, of just difficult, challenging tasks that come along with being a manager. And I would almost suggest that it isn't a case of having bad managers out there as much as it is a case of having badly trained managers out there. So I think the stigma comes along with this lack of training that exists to help managers be really effective at managing the various pressures that are placed on them when they accept this very noble role. And because they don't get the right training, they simply don't meet the very high expectations that people have of managers. I mean, we essentially expect them to be saints, and we all know how unrealistic that is. And then, of course, we chalk it up to, well, it must be bad management. So that's, I think, where it stems from. And it's really a disappointing place for us to be in society when these are the people who are raising their hands and stepping forward and taking on this big, difficult challenge of managing people.
Well, that's so true. And yet, you've worked with a lot of organizations and you're working with them on how to develop their people as not only great managers, but great leaders. So, what are some of the things that you advise them to do?
Yeah, I think a lot of it boils down to the topics that people tend to cover when they're talking about management. So in my experience, when I've worked with organizations or when I've worked with learning and development professionals, the focus is often on one of two things. The first one is around personality and how do you manage people's personalities and how do you leverage emotional intelligence, otherwise known as self-control of your emotions, to be able to address individuals through having difficult conversations, and it really comes down to this whole element of personality conflict. And so that's one way to address it. And the other way we typically see these professionals addressing it is through when they talk about management training, they're talking about some very technical skills like hiring, termination, documenting conversations, policies and procedures. And so there's this very sort of pragmatic set of activities around essentially corrective action on people that aren't fulfilling your expectations. So generally speaking, those are the two areas where learning and development professionals will focus, and executives will focus in training their managers. And we've seen over the last several decades, if you think about personality tests and assessments, the first ones came out in the 1940s, and that was DISC and MBTI. And so we've been introducing these models over the last several decades, and we still don't see any significant change in the motivation or morale or effectiveness of managers. So the work that I've done, especially with the Emerson Suite and working with Doug Emerson, is we really boil it down to some very key principal management practices that are not being taught very well to managers. And when we teach these skills, we find that management effectiveness increases, and employee morale increases and employee engagement increases. And we basically boil it down to three very important elements of management. The first one is about job expectations. Taking somebody's job and clarifying in measurable terms the exact result expectation you need from them, and engaging them in that process. So having them come to you and say, here's what I want to do with my job going forward, and creating a more nimble job description and a more adaptive and agile job description that is based on results rather than a set of activities that stays stable over time. Instead, we focus on results that grow over time, and therefore the employee can grow with those results and the job can evolve with those results. So part one, and I'll just pause there to see if you have any further questions on part one.
There's a couple of things that you said. Number one, I find this interesting because the things that you were describing in the first part, of your response, is something that a leader does not want to get involved with. I mean, that is definitely a manager's responsibility, and leaders have a much more strategic and visionary role and want than that. So that's a real big thing that differentiates managers and leaders. The second thing I was thinking about is years and years ago, I was one of 12 people, only 12 people, certified to teach Tom Peters' In Search of Excellence program. And I worked with Tom, and one of his things was no job description. He said a job description limits you. It doesn't enhance what you do at all. It kind of tells you what you shouldn't be doing and can't be doing, rather than allowing you to do the things that you're really good at and should be doing as part of your employment. So those are the things that came to mind as you were talking about that.
It's so interesting, and those expectations evolve over time. And so what happens is you get the job, you have a job description, you're meeting that job description for probably a period of 6 months, and then the expectations change, but the job description doesn't change. And so by no fault of your own, you stop meeting people's expectations.
That's true. That's so true. And I think that's what he was kind of referring to, because he just said he felt if there was going to be a job description, that it should, and exactly what you said about 6 months, that job description should be written by the person doing that job after about 6 months. And
isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and that's the way he felt, and he was really passionate about it. So I just thought that was interesting. So what is part two of all of this?
So part two is about the effective management of your time and your priorities. And so if you're really clear on the results that your manager expects of you, then naturally those results expectations come with a certain set of authorities, decisions that you have to be able to make, steps that you have to be able to make, either with approval or without approval of someone else. And so one of the things that I do with my clients is we clarify what are the authorities that you have in terms of decision making. And if you don't have certain authorities that you need, how can you go and ask for them? And this is about effective delegation. So somebody with the authority has to be able to grant you the decision right to be able to execute on your results. And so we do this through a very methodical process of saying, which decisions should you own? And then how do you want to engage other people in helping you make those decisions so that you make them effectively with a high degree of quality and a high degree of efficiency? And when you do that, you start to see who are the important people to this decision. Do I need them to be bought into the decision, and therefore I'm actively going to engage them in it and debate with them and understand their opinions and really kind of battle it out? Or do I simply not want them involved in the decision? Maybe I want them to give me some expertise and insight so I can make a better decision. Maybe I want them to do some work for me on the decision. Maybe I need to simply tell them about the decision when I'm done. So you start to really critically assess how people are involved in your decision making and how you're involved in other people's decision making. And then that allows you to better define the meetings that you run and that you attend. Is once you're clear on the decisions that you're a part of and not a part of, then you can determine more clearly which meetings you need to attend. I mean, managers today are feeling pressure from every which direction. They're in meetings from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m., which is when they finally get to take a look at their emails. All of the meetings that they're in are probably either stupid or unproductive or efficient.
I so truly agree with you. Oh, I so totally agree with you, Mary. I mean, one of the things that I said, because I always said I would never work for anybody else, and I never have. However, whenever I've called people, this is when I was really doing a lot of corporate and association work. Whenever I called anybody, they were always in a meeting. And I thought, how can anybody be in that many meetings and get anything done? And most people will tell you that 90% of the meetings they're in, there's no reason for them to be there. So it's interesting that you're bringing that up. And of course, it would add to a lot of time management, and it would be able to allow you to prioritize things so much better as well.
Yeah, and you're using two words there that are really key in terms of time management. I mean, I define time management as being a combination of three skills: prioritization, delegation, and negotiation. And it is amazing how many managers I speak with who, at the thought of prioritizing anything, simply become paralyzed.
But don't you think that's because of the company itself? I mean, they've had the fear of, you know, what put into them. And so they're afraid that if they do anything wrong, they're going to be let go. And then where else are they going to get a job? So it's, I think they're scared.
I agree. I think there's an element of people being told what the priorities are and then feeling disempowered to negotiate those priorities. So, for example, I'm working with a client right now who has been given probably somewhere in the ballpark of 15 priorities. And then the way that they've been doing their key performance indicators is they allocate a percentage rating to each priority, which is meant to tell you where it falls within the priorities. Well, mathematically speaking, if you have 15 priorities and you have to allocate 100 points, then every priority gets no more than maybe 10 or 15 points. And so when you have 15 items with 10 to 15% prioritization, all of them have equal priority, and then you see people become overwhelmed. And so the next skill that we have to help managers learn, which nobody teaches in terms of time management negotiation, is how to look critically at those priorities and make decisions about which ones float to the top, and then be able to have a conversation with somebody else that says, here are the things I believe we need to work on first. Here are the things that will suffer as a result. Are you okay with that? Because I will fail if you make me do all of them at the same time. And if I fail, you will fail. So we need to have a dialogue about which one of these things actually need to get done first.
But I think that's very hard for someone to do when they know their paycheck depends on the person that they're talking to. I think it's a real tough call. And I think, you talk about delegation. And of course, I have my own definition of delegation. I always say it's not do you do it like I do it, but do you do it well enough? And I always use my kids. I say, when my kids were growing up, no, they didn't make the bed the way I liked. And no, they didn't keep their rooms the way I liked, but did they do it well enough? And so that was what I looked at, and it was the same thing in feeding the dogs. I used to measure things out and make sure they were mixed properly. And when I assigned that task to the kids, they dumped everything. And guess what? The dogs ate it anyway. So it was just amazing to me. So, there's a lot of what you're saying in there that's the truth. But then that brings us to leadership. And not maybe, I think for sure, there are many leaders who don't know how to lead because they don't know what they should be telling their managers, and they don't know how to prioritize themselves. So how do you get that across to both the leaders and the managers? And how can a manager become a great leader? And how can a great leader work with a manager?
Yeah, I think the act of prioritizing is a management task to some degree. Leaders will set the vision. They will provide resources around the vision. They will get people to buy into the vision. And then I believe that a great leader also has a great set of management skills that allow them to help their team prioritize. And that takes, I believe, a great degree of courage on both sides. Courage on the leader's side to be able to say no to certain things that are not as high a priority as others, and then courage on the manager's side to be able to debate and push back a little bit on those priorities. I think, the conundrum with the manager that isn't willing to go to bat for the priorities and speak up for fear of losing their paycheck is that if they don't and they try to do it all, they are already in danger of being ineffective and losing a paycheck.
That's true. That is so true. You're absolutely right. So what is the answer here, Mary? And we've got people listening to this who are over 50, and some of them have lost their jobs, because of all the downsizing and right sizing that has been going on, and we know that many times they don't ever get back to that salary range they were in. And then there are people that are starting a second career, and they've had this great experience, but they can't seem to find something that's akin to that when they're looking. And then we have other people who, just may want to go into business for themselves. What do you suggest to people like this?
Yeah, I've had a number of clients in those shoes, and I think the one most wonderful thing that people over 50 have going for them in the job search is that they have the ability to be extremely authentic in what they're looking for and how they project themselves in the workforce or in the job pool. So whether you've been downsized or restructured out or you're changing careers, is you have the opportunity to lean on a strong depth of experience and knowledge and maturity that allows you to be very clear about what you want in your next job, what you're skilled at providing, what results you've had, which then draws you more closely to the employers that are best suited for what you need next in your career. Unlike a university graduate or a young professional who is trying to tailor their resume to be able to attract any job, people over 50 are able to sort of stay consistent with their resume to attract only the jobs that are best suited for them. And I think that's a magical thing, because when you come from that place, there is an element of strength in your energy that comes from that is attractive to people. And I think a lot of times the clients that I've had who are over 50 and in that realm, they're unsure and they're insecure about that because they haven't been in the job search market for potentially decades. So they're still going off of that young professional, new grad mentality of I have to tailor things to suit any job. It's actually different when you're over 50.
Well, so that's one true. Of the things. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because these people who are over 50, number one, I think they're very reliable, and they're really dedicated. I mean, they have their heads screwed on right, and they know how to approach things, and they're used to stability in their job. And of course, the younger person coming up will often change jobs every 6 to 18 months if it means another promotion or learning something new or getting more responsibility or more suited to their lifestyle. So what did you ever have anything bad happen to you at work, and how did you deal with it?
I think the word bad is an interesting one when we ask that question, because when I think back on my career, there isn't anything that I would say I'm not completely grateful for at this point in my career. I had experiences that were challenging. I had a manager who simply became obstinate and angry at everything that came out of my mouth. And it was those experiences that allowed me to make choices about what direction I wanted to take next. And then those steps took me in the direction that I am today, running my own business, teaching others how to manage people. I mean, every experience that I had, others might coin as bad, I would describe as good for me. Yeah,
well, that's like great. That's probably why you're doing what you do.
Yeah, certainly it's provided a lot of fodder.
Well, but you also have to have a certain attitude, Mary. I mean, you can look at everything that happens to you and say, poor me, why me, that kind of thing. Or you can say, okay, settle down. What did I learn from this? What do I have to look at to not do again? How can I improve what happened to me? And really, did I have any control over this? Because there are things that happen to you that you just don't have any control over. And so I think it's important for people to really pay attention to, is it really my fault? Is there anything else I could have done differently? Is this the direction the company was going in? Should I have had my eyes wide open and not, because even if you're doing a great job, things happen and you have no control over those things at all. So I think that's an important point. So we have just a couple minutes left in this segment, and I would like to know what's the common challenges that managers usually come to you for?
Typically, it falls into one of three categories. So I often work with managers who are experiencing conflict. And it's conflict between either them and some of their colleagues, or them and their employer, or them and their team. And ultimately, it boils down to it's no longer about personality, like we were talking about earlier in the interview, but it comes down to, are people meeting your expectations? And if not, how do you clarify the expectations so that the relationship is improved? So I think that's one of the key ones, is conflict. The second one I often get is just overwhelm. They are being pressured and pushed and pulled in all directions, and they are just at the end of their rope and they don't know how to cope with it. And that one we've already talked about in terms of prioritization, delegation, and negotiation, and developing those skills to be able to reduce the overwhelm that managers are experiencing in their jobs.
Yeah, and when we come back, I want to ask you about that, because I think sometimes you do have to stand up for yourself, and I know a lot of people are afraid of that. So hang on, folks. We'll be back with Mary Engel. She's just a whirlwind of information here. So stick with us, and we'll see you in just a few minutes.